The morning sun cast long shadows across my kitchen tiles as I savored my first cup of coffee, scanning the headlines with the contentment that comes from routine. At 72, I treasured these quiet moments before the world demanded my attention. The October air in Denver carried that crisp promise of winter, and everything felt settled, peaceful. "Dad, we brought you something special." Sarah's voice drifted from the doorway, but something in her tone made me look up from my newspaper. She stood there clutching a thick envelope like it contained either a treasure or a bomb. Behind her, Derek leaned against the counter with that casual arrogance he'd perfected during their 3 years of marriage. "What kind of special?" I folded the paper, noting how Sarah's smile seemed painted on, her eyes darting nervously between Derek and me. "Just open it," Derek said, his voice carrying an edge I'd learned to recognize over the past few years. "We've been waiting to share this with you." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, official and ominous. When I tore it open, documents spilled across my breakfast table like accusations. Credit statements, loan papers, betting receipts, all bearing my name and signature, showing debts that made my hands shake. "What is this?" The words came out sharper than intended as I stared at numbers that didn't make sense. $450,000 in gambling debts, casinos I'd never visited, bets I'd never placed. "Those are your obligations." "Dad," Sarah's artificial sweetness was cracking now. "We found them while helping you organize your papers last month. Remember when we cleaned out your office?" I remembered their visit, remembered making them lunch while they rummaged through my desk. But I sure as hell didn't remember accumulating nearly $500,000 in casino debt. "I don't gamble." "Never have." Derek stepped closer, his presence suddenly menacing in my own kitchen. "Memory plays tricks at your age, doesn't it? Those signatures look pretty real to me. The handwriting was mine, perfectly replicated down to the way I dotted my I's. Every document showed dates spanning the past 8 months, a paper trail of destruction I'd supposedly created. "These debts need settling by tomorrow," Derek continued. "Otherwise, we lose everything. The house, your savings, even Sarah's inheritance." Tomorrow was Tuesday. Today was Monday. Sarah moved beside her husband, their united front crystal clear. "We can't let that happen, Dad. We have nowhere else to go if they take the house." I studied my daughter, 42 years old, standing in the kitchen where I'd taught her to make pancakes, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance, where I'd helped her plan her wedding. The same daughter who was now looking at me like I was the enemy. "I didn't sign these," I said quietly. "Someone forged my name. Who else has access to your personal information?" Sarah's tears started flowing. "Your social security number, mother's maiden name, all those security questions. Who else knows you well enough to replicate your signature perfectly?" The implication hung between us like smoke. Derek's satisfied smirk told me everything. I needed to know about who had orchestrated this elaborate deception. I stood slowly, my joints protesting, and pushed back from the table. The documents scattered like leaves in the wind, creating chaos where there had been order just minutes before. "This conversation isn't over." Sarah's tears came harder now, streaming down her cheeks in perfectly timed rivers. "Dad, please. We're family. How can you question us after everything we've been through together?" "Family doesn't commit fraud," I said, keeping the table between us. Derek moved to block the doorway. "Those documents are legal and binding. Your signature, your social security number, your responsibility. You think you can handle this place forever? Managing bills, keeping track of paperwork? I manage just fine. Do you?" Sarah's voice turned sharp. "Because we found these mixed in with your insurance papers. If you were really organized, wouldn't you have noticed $450,000 in debt?" She had a point, and she knew it. The papers had been filed perfectly in my desk, mixed so seamlessly with legitimate documents that even I might have missed them. Someone had planted them deliberately, creating a paper trail of my supposed downfall. "We could have let the debt collectors come," Derek said. his tone becoming reasonable in that way people use when explaining things to children. Let them seize everything. But we wanted to give you a chance to make this right. Make what right. I didn't do anything wrong. Sarah pulled out one of the credit statements, holding it like courtroom evidence. Look at this handwriting, Dad. Look at it carefully. I looked. The signature was mine, not just similar but perfect in every detail. The slight upward slant, the way I pressed too hard with the pen, even the tiny flourish I added unconsciously. Anyone can learn to copy a signature. Across 47 different documents? Derek produced another stack. Credit applications, loan papers, casino markers, all signed over the past 8 months. You think someone followed you around for most of a year, forging your name? Sarah stepped closer, her tears replaced by something harder. We're not asking you to admit anything. We're asking you to take responsibility. These debts exist. They're in your name. If they don't get paid, we all lose everything. I looked around my kitchen, my coffee maker, my dishes, my calendar with doctor's appointments marked in my handwriting. This was my house, my life, my routine they were trying to steal. Where are we supposed to go? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Derek's been unemployed for 4 months. We've been staying here because we literally have nowhere else. That was news to me. I'd thought their frequent visits were about spending time together, not financial desperation. If you don't pay, Derek continued, the creditors will seize any assets they can find. Everything will be gone. Sarah sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I thought we could handle this as a family, work something out together. They're not my debts, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. The signatures were too perfect, too consistent across dozens of documents. That Sarah stood abruptly, her face transforming from desperation to cold rage. You know what? I'm done with this. Her voice cracked like a whip. We've tried being reasonable, but you're too selfish to care about anyone but yourself. She moved toward the coffee maker, her movements sharp and jerky. 42 years I've been your daughter. 42 years of dealing with your stubborn attitude. Sarah, calm down, I said, but something in her posture made me step back. Calm down? She spun around, coffee pot in her hands, steam rising from the heated glass. My husband can't find work. We're about to lose everything. And you're acting like none of this is your fault. The coffee was still hot, nearly boiling. I could see the steam, could feel the heat radiating from the pot as she held it at chest level. Her knuckles were white around the handle. I raised you better than this, I said quietly. You raised me to clean up your messes. The words exploded out of her, and suddenly the coffee pot was flying through the air in a perfect arc toward my chest. I saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough. The scalding liquid hit me like liquid fire, soaking through my shirt in seconds. The heat seared my skin, and I gasped, stumbling backward as coffee dripped down my torso. Get out. Derek's voice was calm, almost conversational. This is our house now. Pack whatever you can carry and get out. This is my house. I managed, pulling the wet fabric away from my burned skin. Not anymore. Derek stepped closer. Those debt papers change everything. By tomorrow, creditors will have liens on this property. But Sarah and I can negotiate with them. We've got nothing to lose. I looked at my daughter, still holding the empty pot, her chest heaving. The woman who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories, who I'd taught to ride a bicycle in the driveway outside. She wouldn't meet my eyes. You planned this, I said, the realization hitting like ice water after the burning coffee. Both of you. The documents, the timing, everything. We planned to solve a problem, Derek said. Your problem. The one you created with your gambling and your refusal to take responsibility. I needed medical attention for the burns, but more than that, I needed to get away from these people who looked like my family but acted like strangers. I need to change clothes. 5 minutes, Derek said. Pack light. We'll send your things later if we feel generous. I walked toward my bedroom, feeling their eyes following me. Each step sent fresh waves of pain across my burned chest. Behind me, I heard whispered conferences, urgent planning for their next move. In my bedroom, I peeled off the coffee-soaked shirt carefully, wincing as fabric pulled away from my skin. The burns weren't life-threatening, but they covered most of my chest in angry red patches. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was, a 72-year-old man betrayed by the people he trusted most. But my eyes were clear, and my hands were steady as I packed essentials into a small suitcase. They wanted me gone, wanted me to disappear quietly while they stole everything I'd worked for. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I slipped out the back door, crossing the yard toward my neighbor's house. Walter Chun had lived next door for 12 years, ever since retiring from his engineering career. We'd shared many conversations over the fence about baseball, weather, and the neighborhood's changes. His kitchen light was on, and I could see him reading at his table. Normal morning routine, the kind I'd been enjoying myself less than an hour ago. I knocked on his door, trying to make it sound casual rather than desperate. Walter opened it wearing a bathrobe and concern that deepened when he saw my face. "Richard, what happened?" "You look terrible." "Worse than that," I said, shifting my suitcase. "I need to ask a favor. Could I come in for a few minutes?" He stepped back immediately, welcoming me with the same hospitality he'd always shown. His kitchen was warm and smelled like bacon, the comfortable morning atmosphere I'd lost somewhere between Sarah's envelope and her coffee assault. "Sit down," he gestured to his table. "You want coffee? Something to eat?" "Coffee would be good." I set my suitcase down and eased into a chair, trying not to wince as the burns pulled against my shirt. "I've got a story to tell you, Walter. Not a pleasant one." He poured coffee into a mug and set it before me. "I'm listening. Where to start? With this morning's betrayal, or with the pattern I should have recognized years ago?" 3 years ago, I took in Sarah and Derek when they said they needed help getting back on their feet. Biggest mistake I ever made. Walter's eyebrows rose, but he didn't interrupt. Good listener, probably learned from years of working with technical teams. I thought I was helping family. Turns out I was enabling two people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. I sipped the coffee, grateful for warmth that didn't burn. It started small. Derek lost another job. They couldn't make rent. Could they stay in my spare room for a month? How long did they actually stay? 3 years. And Derek never found stable work. Oh, he found jobs, lost them too. Always someone else's fault. Always some boss who didn't appreciate his talents. The familiar frustration built in my chest. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem started when Derek decided my house was his house. Rearranged my garage, moved my tools, invited friends over for poker games until 3 in the morning. Walter leaned forward. And Sarah supported this. Sarah made excuses. When I complained about the noise, I was being too sensitive. When I objected to his friends drinking my beer, I was being selfish. When he started bringing home stray dogs without asking, I was being heartless. I stood and walked to Walter's window, looking toward my house where shadows moved behind the kitchen curtains. Last year, Derek convinced me to invest in a food truck business. $15,000 from my retirement savings. Let me guess. The business failed? Oh, it existed. Derek used it for 2 weeks, then sold it to pay gambling debts he hadn't mentioned. When I confronted him, he said the business model was flawed and he was protecting me from further losses. Walter's coffee mug hit the table with a sharp sound. He stole $15,000 and called it protection. Sarah backed him up. Said he'd made the best decision under difficult circumstances. Said I should be grateful. Why didn't you throw them out then? The question I'd been asking myself. Because Sarah's my daughter. Because I kept thinking this was temporary, that Derek would eventually mature. Because every time I tried to set boundaries, Sarah would cry and talk about family loyalty. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to photos I'd taken of the documents. This morning was different. They showed me papers claiming I owe $450,000 in gambling debts. Debts I never incurred, with my signature forged on every page. Walter studied the screen, his expression growing grim. This is fraud. Criminal fraud. That's what I told them. You know what Sarah did when I refused to pay? I unbuttoned my shirt to show the burns. She threw hot coffee at me. Walter's face went pale. She actually burned you. Then Derek threatened me, demanded I leave my own property. I rebuttoned my shirt carefully. But here's what they don't know. Those gambling debts? They're real, but they're Derek's, not mine. He's been using my identity to create accounts, accumulating massive losses over 2 years. How do you know this? Because he got sloppy. Left browser windows open, forgot to log out of betting sites. I found transaction histories going back 24 months. Thousands of dollars in losses every week. I showed Walter the screenshots. When the legitimate sites cut him off, he moved to loan sharks. Found text messages about money owed to people with names like Fat Tony and Iceman Mike. Walter shook his head in disbelief. How much does he actually owe? Near as I can figure, about $300,000 in gambling debts, another $150,000 in interest and penalties. But here's the real kicker. He's been arrested before. Fraud charges last year, got out on bail. Trials next month. Walter's hands clenched into fists. Sarah knew? She knew everything. The gambling, the arrest, the fake documents. This whole scheme was designed to make me responsible for his debts before the trial starts. That's why they needed you out today. Exactly. Once I'm gone, they can claim residency and force creditors to negotiate with them instead of coming after me directly. Walter stood abruptly. This has gone far enough. We need to call the police. Police? The suggestion caught me off guard. Richard, they've committed identity theft, fraud, assault, and extortion. Your daughter threw scalding coffee at you. What are you waiting for? I looked down at my hands, seeing the slight tremor that had been there since Sarah's explosion. Part of me still wanted to believe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. She's still my daughter. No. Walter's voice was firm. Your daughter died sometime in the last 3 years. The woman living in your house is a criminal who happens to share your DNA. He moved to his phone. We're calling 911 right now, before they destroy evidence or disappear with whatever else they can steal. I wanted to argue, but Walter was right. The Sarah who'd loved bedtime stories and piggyback rides was gone, replaced by someone capable of calculated cruelty. Make the call. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers, Detective Martinez and Officer Johnson, both professional and thorough. I showed them my burns, walked them through the morning's events, and provided access to my house for evidence collection. Sarah's face went white when she saw the officers. Derek's expression shifted from surprise to calculation in seconds, but it was too late. The documents were still scattered across my kitchen table, the coffee stains still visible on the floor. Within an hour, both were under arrest. Derek for fraud and identity theft, Sarah for domestic battery. As they were led away in separate cars, I felt something unexpected, relief. Not satisfaction, not victory, but simple relief that the lies were finally over. 3 weeks later, I sat in my restored kitchen, reading the newspaper without fear of interruption. Walter knocked on my door, carrying legal documents and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered something interesting. You might want to see this, he said, settling into the chair where Sarah had ambushed me. I've been tracking court filings. The papers showed Derek's complete financial collapse. Bankruptcy petition, repossessed car, terminated employment, IRS audit, even threats from the loan sharks whose numbers I'd found on his phone. His attempt to steal my house had cost him everything. Sarah's story was different, but equally devastating. 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, a permanent restraining order. She'd violated it twice in the first week, showing up at my house while I was out. Each violation brought additional consequences, more court dates, extended probation. She'd lost her job, her apartment, most of her friends. The divorce from Derek was finalized while she was still in county lockup, cutting her off from any remaining shared assets. "She sent you this," Walter said, producing an envelope. "Came to my address. Figured she knew you wouldn't open anything from her directly." The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten in Sarah's careful script. I read the first paragraph before folding it back up. Apologies, explanations, requests for another chance. "What are you going to do?" Walter asked. I looked out the window at my garden, where I'd planted new flowers to replace the ones Sarah and Derek had trampled. "Nothing. She made her choice 3 years ago when she chose Derek over basic decency. She's in counseling now, making progress according to the reports. Good for her. Maybe she'll learn something useful for her next family." Walter studied my face carefully. "You're really done with her?" She threw scalding coffee at me to defend a man who was stealing my life savings. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. As Walter left, I returned to my newspaper and coffee, finally able to enjoy both without reservation. My phone rang, showing Margaret's number from Travel and Taste magazine. "Richard, ready to get back to work?" For 30 years, I'd maintained 2 lives with careful precision. Richard Thompson, the retired electrician, was the persona my family knew. Modest pension, simple tastes, someone who needed their help and support. But Richard Thompson, the food critic, was entirely different. Well-traveled, financially independent, with a reputation built on honest reviews and exacting standards. The deception had been necessary. Sarah's mother had always resented my frequent travel, suspicious that reviewing restaurants was somehow less legitimate than fixing electrical systems. After her death, I'd kept the secret from habit and self-protection, sensing that Sarah's relationship with money was complicated. "More than ready," I told Margaret. "What do you have for me?" Seattle's got 4 new establishments. Readers are asking about Pacific Northwest fusion, sustainable seafood, and something called molecular gastronomy. Interested? Send me the details. I opened my calendar application, noting with satisfaction how empty it was of family obligations and manufactured crises. I can fly out next week, in my home office. Behind a hidden panel I'd installed years earlier, my professional files waited in perfect order. Press credentials, expense reports, correspondence with editors at major publications. The work that had quietly funded my comfortable retirement while my family assumed I was struggling on an electrician's pension. My phone buzzed with flight details from Margaret. For the first time in months, I smiled without reservation. The woman who'd tried to destroy my life was facing consequences. The man who'd tried to steal my home was in financial ruin. And Richard Thompson, both versions of him, was finally free to live authentically. Tomorrow, I'd booked that flight to Seattle. Tonight, I'd plan my route through the city's most promising restaurants, my appetite for good food and honest work fully restored. The house settled around me with comfortable sounds of home. The refrigerator humming, the heat cycling on, the grandfather clock marking time that belonged entirely to me. Perfect. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? Have you ever had someone close to you betray your trust like this? What would you have done in Richard's situation? Share your thoughts about family loyalty versus self-protection. I'd love to hear your perspective on this story.